The father didn't die. It's under the floor on the kitchen floor. The voice of the little girl, a 5-year-old doll, echoed in the police station, and Officer Roberto Mendez almost choked on his coffee. Bia was sitting on the plastic chair at the police station, swinging her legs, hugging a worn-out teddy bear. She repeated with the frightening naturalness of someone telling what they ate for lunch. Dad is downstairs where Mom put the new tiles. Children have such a vivid imagination, don't they? Muttered Sergeant Silva, without taking his eyes off the paperwork. She had probably seen a horror movie, but there was something in Bia's eyes that made the police chief hesitate. Those big, serious eyes didn't have the typical fantasy of a child making up a story. They were the eyes of someone who saw something they shouldn't have seen. Mendez knew that look. He had heard it in trauma victims, but never in a child so young. The neighbor who brought the girl, Mrs. Laura, a 67-year-old woman, insisted that something was wrong. Marcos Fernandez disappeared 4 days ago, police chief. It's not like him to disappear like that, leaving his daughter behind. That man wouldn't even go to the bakery without letting someone know. Mendez knew Marcos de Vista, a civil engineer respected in the community, always punctual for his daughter's school appointments, the kind of father who carried photos of his child in his wallet and never missed a presentation. The contrast with his wife was stark day and night. Patricia Fontes had shown up at the police station just once to report her husband's disappearance with the same calmness as someone going to renew their driver's license. A white woman, well-dressed, who spoke with that superior tone that Mendez recognized very well, the tone of someone who has always been taken seriously because of the color of her skin and the size of her bank account. My husband sometimes travels for work without telling me, you know, Patricia had said, adjusting her designer bag. It's nothing serious. Marcos is unpredictable. The pause that it seemed unpredictable sounded as false as a 3 Brazilian reals bill. But at the time, Mendez didn't pay much attention. Officer Dona Laura lowered her voice, looking around nervously. There's something I didn't tell you. The night Marcos disappeared, I heard screams coming from the house, strange noises as if they were dragging something very heavy across the floor. And the next day, a renovation team showed up there, working until dawn. Mendez felt a shiver. What kind of renovation? The kitchen floor. Patricia said it was a surprise for Marcos when he returned from his trip. The irony in the woman's voice was so thick that it could be cut with a knife. The police officer vaguely remembered Patricia mentioning a small construction project in her testimony, but it seemed like an insignificant detail at the time. Now, looking at Bia, Mendy felt like he had missed something criminally important in that initial conversation. The girl was drawing on the paper he had given her. It looked like a room and a man lying underneath a checkered floor. The details were frighteningly precise for a 5-year-old. Bia Mendy bent down to the child's height, modulating her voice to sound as gentle as possible. Where exactly is Daddy? In the new kitchen, she answered without hesitation. Mommy said it was our secret, but Daddy is very cold down there. He cried loudly before becoming quiet. Forever. Dona Laura covered her mouth with her hands in horror. Silva finally looked up from the papers, realizing the gravity of the situation for the first time. Bia, little doll. Mendez continued with a controlled voice. Can you tell me what happened the night Daddy was quiet? The girl looked at the teddy bear as if asking the toy for permission to tell her the secret. Mom hit Dad with a big pot from the kitchen. Dad fell to the floor and never got up again. Then Mom cried a lot and said it was his fault, that he was stubborn and didn't listen. A heavy silence fell over the police station. Mendez felt his heart race in his chest. And what did Mom do next? She took the blue sheet from my room and wrapped Daddy all in it. Then she dug a really big hole in the kitchen and put him in there. Then the men came with the new floor and covered everything. Pia spoke as if describing her grandmother's cake recipe, her naturalness making everything even more disturbing. What Chief Mendez didn't know was that 40 kilometers away, Patricia Fontes was in her private lawyer's office, calmly explaining why she needed to speed up the process of her missing husband's life insurance. She had no idea that Marcos Fernandez had discovered something about his wife's cryptocurrency investments, which were worth much more than his own life. Much less did he imagine that Bia, despite her 5 years, kept secrets that would transform that routine disappearance case into the biggest criminal turnaround the city had ever seen. As he looked closely at the girl's drawing, Mendez noticed a detail that made his blood run cold. She had drawn not only a man beneath the floor, but also small, rectangular bags next to him, as if she knew exactly what else was buried in that hastily remodeled kitchen. Men knew he had something much bigger on his hands in a simple missing person case. 2 hours after Bia's revelation, he was on the phone with Judge Bastos, trying to get a search warrant for the Fontes residence. Roberto, are you asking me to authorize an excavation in a family's backyard based on the testimony of a 5-year-old child? The judge's voice sounded skeptical over the phone. That won't last 5 minutes. In court, sir, we have a child who described specific details of a crime, a suspicious renovation carried out shortly after the disappearance, and a wife who displays an unusual coldness towards the situation. Mendez felt frustration rise in his chest. And do you have any physical evidence, adult witnesses, anything more than the word of a traumatized little girl? Mendez hung up the phone with more force than he intended. 20 years on the force, and he still hit the same wall. When the family was rich and white, bureaucracy became an insurmountable wall. Silva approached the table with a somber expression. Boss, I just got in. Interesting call. Patricia Fontes was at her lawyer's office this morning. It seems she wants to expedite her husband's life insurance. How convenient, right? Mendez massaged his temples, feeling a familiar headache coming on. How long has Marcos been missing? For days, and she's already after money. At that moment, the police station phone rang. Silva answered, and after a few seconds, covered the receiver with his hand. It's her, Patricia Fontes. Does she want to speak to you? Mendez took a deep breath before answering. Delegate Mendez at your disposal. Delegate, this is Patricia Fontes. I heard my daughter was there today. Her voice was controlled, but there was an underlying tension that she couldn't fully hide. Your daughter is fine. Mrs. Patricia. She was worried about her father. Bia has a very active imagination. Officer, I hope you are not taking a little child's fantasies too seriously. The condescending tone was unmistakable. Mendy felt his pulse quicken. What kind of fantasies specifically? You know how kids are, right? Always making up stories about monsters under bed, people buried in the backyard. Patricia laughed, a humorless laugh. It's just her way of dealing with her father's temporary absence. Interesting that you mention it. Buried people, Mrs. Patricia. Your daughter was very specific about the location. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Officer, I hope you are not considering disturbing a grieving family based on the fantasies of a traumatized child. My lawyer would be very disappointed with such an unprofessional approach. The veiled threat was crystal clear. Mendez knew the game. Influential families always had expensive lawyers ready to turn police investigations into bureaucratic nightmares. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Have a good day. After hanging up, Mendez stared at the phone for a long moment. In his career, he had learned to read people, and Patricia Faunus had just confirmed his suspicions in the worst possible way. No one mentions people being buried spontaneously unless they have a very specific reason for it to be on their mind. Silva approached. Again, boss, there's one more thing. I got Marcos's phone records for the last 30 days. Interesting. He made several calls to a divorce attorney in the week before he went missing. Mendez felt a piece of the puzzle fall into place. Marcos was planning to get a divorce. And there, more. Silva continued. A quick search of the municipality's records. The house is in his name, inherited from his father. If he died without a will, it would go to his wife. But if there was a divorce, she would lose everything. Mendez leaned back in his chair, the picture becoming crystal clear. Financial reason, opportunity during the renovation, and now the urgency of it. At that moment, Mrs. Laura entered the police station, accompanied by Bia. The girl ran straight to Mendez, as if he were a longtime friend. Uncle Mendez, Mommy, is mad at me for talking about Daddy, Bia said, climbing onto the chair next to his desk. Why is she mad? Doll? She said they're going to take her away now and I'm going to be alone. But I told her you seemed nice and I wasn't going to let that happen. Mendez's heart sank. That innocent child had no idea of the gravity of the situation he had, triggered with his brutal honesty. Bia, do you remember anything else about the night your daddy was quiet? The girl thought for a moment. Mom cried a lot afterwards and talked on the phone with a man who called her my love. Dad never called her that. Donna Laura and Mendez exchanged meaningful looks. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. An extramarital affair. And do you know who that man on the phone was? I don't know his name, but he came home once when Dad was at work. Mom said it was Uncle Ricardo, but Dad doesn't have a brother. Bia swung her legs on the chair and they kissed. On the mouth, just like Mom and Dad used to do before they started fighting. All the time, Mendez closed his eyes for a moment. A 5-year-old child had provided more useful information into conversations than many detectives could gather in weeks of investigation. Bia's innocence was both a blessing and a curse. She saw everything, but did not understand the devastating implications of what she had witnessed, while Patricia Fontes was probably at home, coldly calculating how to expedite her life insurance and plan her new life with her lover. A brave little girl had just given the justice system the information it needed to solve a premeditated murder. What the arrogant widow didn't know was that every veiled threat and every elaborate lie only dug her grave deeper, while a child's innocent truth became the most powerful weapon Mendez had ever held in his hands. Mendez knew that taking on an influential family would require more than police intuition. It would require surgical strategy. While Patricia Faunus probably slept peacefully, confident in her expensive lawyers and political connections, the police chief spent the night putting together a case that she would never see coming. Silva, I need you to do something unofficial for me, Mendez said, lowering his voice in the empty police station. Do you know anyone at the cell phone carrier who could help us with some cell phone location records? Silva smiled mischievously. My brother-in-law works there. What kind of unofficial information do you need? Location of Marcos Fernandez's cell phone on the night he disappeared and, if possible, data from the tower closest to Fonta's house. Mendez scribbled notes in a notebook he kept away from official archives. I want to know if his phone was left in a specific location. Meanwhile, Donna, Laura had become an unexpectedly valuable ally. The retired lady had something Mendez desperately needed: time, patience, and invisible ability that only older neighbors have to observe everything without being noticed. Deputy, she called mid-morning, whispering into the phone, Patricia is packing 2 large suitcases, and that man Bia mentioned Uncle Ricardo is helping her. Mendy felt his adrenaline rising. Can you see the license plate of his car? I've already written it down. And there's more. They are taking some boxes out of the basement. Boxes that seem too heavy for 2 people to carry with such difficulty. MS, Laura, you are a better detective than half of my officers. Mendez smiled for the first time in days. Keep watching, but keep your distance. If they realize they're being watched, officer, I have 70 years of experience watching people. They won't notice me. The pause in the conversation was interrupted by Silva, who returned with information that would make Patricia Fontes completely rethink her arrogance. Boss, my brother-in-law got the data. Marcos Fernandez's cell phone was left at his residence from 10 p.m. until 3 and on the day he disappeared. After that, the signal simply died. Exactly when Bia said she witnessed the argument and the aggression, Mendez closed his eyes, feeling the pieces fall into place. And were you able to identify Uncle Ricardo? Ricardo Steinberg, 42 years old, financial consultant. And this is where things get interesting. Whose name does he have a cryptocurrency company registered under? Patricia Fontes. Of course. A shell company registered 3 months before Marcos disappeared. They had been planning an exit for a long time. At that moment, Mendez had an idea that would make all the difference. He called Dr. Paul Acosta, a renowned child psychologist, and one of the few people he completely trusted to handle sensitive cases. Paul, I need a favor. I have a 5-year-old girl who witnessed something traumatic. She has already spoken to me, but I need someone with experience to validate her testimony so that it is irrefutable in court. Roberto, you know that statements from such young children are rarely accepted as evidence. This one is different. Paula, this child has details that only an eyewitness could have. And if we can document this properly with your expertise, we have a real chance of doing justice. Dr. Paul Acosta agreed to meet with Bia that afternoon. Meanwhile, Mendez was preparing his riskiest move yet, confronting Patricia Fontes before she could escape, but this time with questions she would never have expected. Silva, let's make a social visit to Patricia's house. Nothing official, just take a look to see how she's dealing with her husband's disappearance. Mendez's smile had something predatory about it. Sometimes the most arrogant people make the stupidest mistakes when they feel too confident. As they drove to Casa dos Fontes, Mendez knew he was playing a dangerous game. Patricia had probably already called her lawyers, but there was one thing that all the money in the world could not buy: the innocent truth of a child who had not yet learned to lie. What Patricia Fontes didn't know was that every veiled threat, every condescending smile, and every attempt to use privilege to escape justice only fueled the determination of a man who had dedicated his entire life to protecting the vulnerable from the powerful. And when the truth finally came out, No. Lawyer would be expensive enough to contain the damage. Arriving at the house, Mendez noticed the bags in Ricardo's car and smiled mentally. Guilty people always make the same mistake. They think they are smarter than everyone else. But this time arrogance would be the instrument of their downfall, and justice would come through the honest words of a brave little girl who refused to keep secrets about the father she loved. Mendez knocked on the source's door with the confidence of someone who had all the cards up his sleeve. When Patricia opened the door, her forced smile disappeared when she saw the determined expression on the police chief's face. Mrs. Patricia, I'm glad to see you still here. From what I can see, they're packing their bags for a trip. Mendez discreetly pointed to the suitcases in Ricardo's car, who quickly hid behind the curtain. Just a long weekend. To clear our heads while we wait for news from Marcos. Patricia tried to keep her tone casual, but her hands were shaking slightly. Interesting, especially considering I just discovered something fascinating about your husband's cell phone. Mendez took an envelope out of his pocket. Cell tower data shows that his device was left here at his house from 8 p.m. until exactly 3 a.m. on the day he disappeared. After that, the signal simply disappeared. Patricia's face visibly paled. He must have forgotten the charger. Funny, because Bia told me that it was exactly during this period that she witnessed the lady attacking Marcos with an iron frying pan. Mendez observed every microexpression on Patricia's face. And there's more. We discovered your cryptocurrency shell company, registered jointly with Ricardo Steinberg. At that moment, Ricardo appeared at the door, visibly nervous. Patricia, who is this? Ricardo Steinberg, I assume the Uncle Ricardo that Bia mentioned. Mendez smiled coldly. Interesting how a 5-year-old child can be more honest than 2 adults with college degrees, isn't it? You can't prove anything. Patricia tried to regain her composure, but her voice already sounded desperate. It's just speculation, based on the fantasies of a traumatized child. Mendez laughed. A dark laugh. Speculation, Mrs. Patricia. While the lady thought she was very clever, Miss Laura was documenting her every step, including the heavy boxes they took out of the basement earlier today. The blood completely drained from Ricardo's face. Patricia, you said. No one was paying attention. Shut up, Patricia yelled, completely losing control for first time. And there's more. Mendez continued to savor every second of the revelation. We have access to your shell company's bank statements, suspicious transfers, money missing from Marcos's joint account, attempts to streamline life insurance. Did you really believe that you could murder a man, bury him in his own home, and still profit from it? Ricardo began to sweat visibly. Patricia, you told me that he had agreed to an amicable divorce. You lied about everything, you idiot. Did you believe that a man like Marcos would share his inheritance with me? Patricia turned to Ricardo like a cornered animal. He was going to leave me penniless. Mendez watched the couple fall apart with satisfaction. Arrogant people always destroy themselves when the pressure increases. Do you know what impresses me the most? Mendez continued calmly. You completely underestimated a 5-year-old. They thought they could manipulate Bia into keeping quiet about her own father's murder. What kind of monsters do this? Patricia was shaking with anger and despair. That girl doesn't understand anything. She doesn't know what she saw. She knew enough to lead us straight to her father's body, and she knew enough to describe exactly how the lady killed Marcos with an iron pan while his back was turned. Mendy approached, and the most ironic thing is, if they had treated Bia with love and affection she might never have spoken, but you terrified her so much that she trusted strangers more than her own mother. Ricardo began to cry uncontrollably. I didn't know she was going to kill someone. I just helped with the money. You helped bury the body, Ricardo. Bia saw you digging with her mother. Mendez showed no mercy, and now the two will get to know the justice system they tried to deceive. Patricia made one last desperate attempt. You can't trust a child's word against two respectable adults. Respectable adults? Mendez laughed openly. A murderer and her accomplice, who tried to profit from the crime. And as for the child, she gave us information that led directly to physical evidence, telecommunications data, and financial records. Bia's innocent truth was more trustworthy than all her elaborate lies. At that moment, sirens began to howl in the distance. Mendez had called for reinforcement before arriving. Most pathetic of all, Mendez concluded as the vehicles approached. You destroyed a family, traumatized an innocent child, and ruined your own lives out of pure greed. Marcos Fernandez was a decent man who deserved much more than a murderous wife and a cowardly death. Patricia burst into tears of despair when she realized there was no way out. Ricardo tried to run, but Mendez had already blocked all escape routes. The arrogance that had sustained him for days evaporated, replaced by the panic that had come at the hands of a brave little girl who refused to keep secrets about the father she loved. As the handcuffs clicked on his wrists, a question hung in the air. How would Bia react when she learned that her courage had brought justice to her father and freedom to herself? 6 months after the trial that shocked the city, Mendez was in his office when he received a call that made him smile for the first time in weeks. It was Mrs. Laura, now Bia's legal guardian, with news that warmed her heart. Officer, you need to know, Bia is flourishing at her new school. The psychologist said she is recovering beautifully, and yesterday she asked me if she could write you a letter. Mendez looked out the window, remembering the brave little girl who had changed everything with her brutal honesty and how she's dealing with it. Oh, she understands that her mother did something very wrong, but she doesn't hold any anger. Yesterday she said to me, Grandma Laura, I hope Dad not be forgotten, right? The woman's voice broke. This child has a wisdom that many adults will never have. Meanwhile, at the State Women's Penitentiary, Patricia Fontes discovered that privilege and money do not buy respect among inmates sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She spent her days in isolation, rejected even by other inmates who abhorred anyone who killed their own husband and traumatized a child. Ricardo Steinberg was no luckier. Sentenced to 25 years as an accomplice, he lost not only his freedom, but also all the fortune he had helped Patricia steal from Marcos. The cryptocurrency investments that seemed so smart evaporated when authorities froze all the shell companies' accounts. The irony was delicious. 2 sophisticated adults who thought they were too smart to be caught by a 5-year-old ended up destroyed by the very innocence they tried to exploit. Dr. Paul Acosta, the psychologist who documented Bia's trauma, became a staunch advocate for the rights of child victims of domestic crimes. The Bia Fontes case changed the way we deal with children's testimony. She explained it in lectures around the country. A child who has not learned to lie can be the most reliable witness there is. Mendez frequently received calls from other delegates seeking advice on similar cases. The BIA protocol, as it became known, established guidelines for investigating crimes based on reports from children saving dozens of families from similar situations. The house where Marcos was murdered remained empty for months until Dona Laura suggested something that made Mendez smile. Why don't we turn it into a community center? A place where children can play and feel safe to speak up when something is wrong? The proposal was unanimously approved by the city council. The Marcos Fernandez Center has become a symbol of how a child's truth can transform tragedy into hope. On the first anniversary of Marcos's death, Mendez visited the grave with Bia and Dona. Laura, the girl, now 6, placed yellow flowers, her father's favorite, on the grave and whispered, "Daddy, everyone knows you were a good man. No one will forget." Mendez knelt down next to Bia. "You know you re a heroine, right? Because of your courage, your father got justice and you re-safe." Bia smiled with that old wisdom that some children develop after facing storms. "I only told the truth, Uncle Mendez. Grandma Laura taught me that lying hurts more than the truth." Months later, Mendy learned that Patricia had tried to appeal the sentence, arguing that a child's testimony should not have been considered. The request was denied in less than 24 hours. The judge was clear: credibility has no age. This child demonstrated more integrity and courage than many adults who have passed through this court. The last news about Ricardo came in the newspapers. He had lost his mind in prison, repeating obsessively. The girl knew everything until he was transferred to the psychiatric ward. Mendez kept in his drawer a photo that Dona Laura had taken of Bia in the playground at the community center, smiling on the swing donated in memory of her father. Whenever a difficult case came across his desk, he would look at that photo and remember, sometimes justice comes through the most unlikely voices. The arrogance of Patricia Fontes, who believed she could manipulate a child and deceive the system, became her own social and legal death sentence.